Welcome to Ancient Wisdom, Modern Innovation, Leading in an Unpredictable Future. How many of us feel like that?
Yeah, wow.
Unpredictable moment by moment, right? Pretty much. But anyways, hi. My name is Doreen, and I'm the Executive Director of the Ignite Institute, which is a leadership and innovation lab based in Berkeley, California. And we work we bridge ancient wisdom with disruptive innovation to develop leaders who are socially responsible and are looking to make a better tomorrow. Okay? In addition to that, we develop innovative business models that are also socially responsible and work to make change in the world. Okay? We're actually a center that's affiliated with the Pacific School of Religion, and it is a 150-year-old institution, a progressive Christian seminary. That's the oldest Christian seminary west of Mississippi, and it has been heavily involved in social justice for decades. Okay? So a very exciting place to be in this. And I think the reason many of us are here is precisely because we see so many challenges out there in the world. And if you actually just take a look at some of the Sustainable Development Goals that the United Nations has put forth, it's like there is something for every single one of us to do and then some, okay? Anything from poverty to hunger to good health to decent work and economic growth to life below the water to life on top of the earth. You name it, there are challenges everywhere, okay? And so that's, what we're kind of taking a look at in terms of, wow, what can we do as a larger community to make a difference? And so interestingly enough, as an educational institution at the Ignite Institute, we went out to managers in for-profits, nonprofits, healthcare, education, and asked them from their perspective what was important in a leader, okay? And so interesting, the top 4 qualities that they mentioned. Number 1, integrity. Who knew, right? Shouldn't that kind of be where we start? Right? Number 2, ethics. Okay? Following along the same lines, right? Number 3, compassion. Number 4, any guesses following along that same line? Starts with an E. Empathy, okay? And you want to know what was rock bottom? Rock bottom is charisma. They're like, no, we don't need personality, okay? We just need you to be a good person, all right? Interesting, right? How times have changed, right? So with that, we set out to look and see what existed in leadership programs and what didn't. And we created a 4-month certificate on of leadership and innovation for an unpredictable future. Okay? And in that, we combined faculty that range from being doctors of theology to innovators from Silicon Valley to design thinkers from IDEO. Okay? And you're like, well, that's kind of an unusual combination, right? But you know what? These are unusual times. So that's where we're at, all right? So for all of us tonight, we have an action-packed agenda, which we are actually powering through, okay? You've already done the networking. The refreshments are running late because in an unpredictable future, don't quite know what it means when they say 40-minute pizza delivery and it's 2 hours. But you know what? That's okay. It should be coming shortly. It will be nice and hot. We will take a break wherever we are at that moment. It's going to be set up on the table right outside where there's drinks. And if you are absolutely starving and having a sugar low right now, there are delicious homemade ones. Okay? So feel free, all right? And then for the rest of the evening, we are going to be having, and I will let each one introduce themselves in a moment, but our first session will be on ancient wisdom, and we have Dr. Jay Johnson, who will be presenting on that. Then we will have leadership within communities, and we have Marcia Evans who will be talking about that. And last but not least, to talk to us about innovation, we have the best way to predict the future is to invent it, and Don Proctor will be talking about that, okay? After you hear all of that amazing insight and wisdom, we're planning to have like a short creative exercise to see how we might actually apply some of this ancient wisdom and new leadership insights into innovating some solutions for one of today's problems that we hear a lot about, which you'll hear more about later, okay? And then we'll just kind of call it a wrap. Simple. And after every presentation, we'll actually have some time for some quick questions to the particular presenter, because I don't know if you guys are like me, but if I wait too long to ask my question, I forget what it was, right? So, don't worry, we will absolutely have an opportunity to ask each presenter specifics. Any questions? So far, so good? All right, thank you all so much. So with that, I would like for each one of our presenters to give a quick introduction of yourself, and then we'll kick off with Jay.
Oh, so each, okay.
Yeah, just
Great.
say a little bit about you.
Great. Hi. Yes.
Oh, and I'm so sorry. I forgot to mention we are live streaming, okay? So just so you know, and please don't bump into the chair. Aaron will be doing that, okay? Thanks.
My name is Jay Johnson. I'm on the faculty at Pacific School of Religion and work with Doreen and others at the Ignite Institute. My area is theology and culture, so I look at the way that religious communities and theological ideas contribute or not to movements of positive social change in American history, American culture, and today. And so I'm doing the ancient wisdom piece. Scholars of ancient wisdom actually use shiny things like this, which is pretty cool. But I also brought a paper version because we also don't trust that they will really work. So anyway, that's me.
Yes, good evening. My name is Marcia Evans, and I've been associated with Ignite since its inception a few years ago, and been a part of its parent institution, Pacific School of Religion, for too many years in too much debt. So that's what I do. I live in Sacramento, where in part pastor part a church and do some work with the youth and also a lot of interfaith type of programs. But in general, I really love this intersection of like spirituality, community building, and innovative change. And I'm particularly interested in how art works and plays into all of that. So that has been one of my areas of interest. We won't talk about it too much tonight, but I just believe in bringing all your passion to your work, and I'm glad to be here tonight.
Don Proctor recently retired from 25 years in the Silicon Valley. I've worked with a few of you for a number of those years. I'm currently teaching at USF and UC Berkeley. I serve on 4 nonprofit boards, and I've stayed on at Cisco as the CEO of the Center for Cisco Heritage, which is the LLC that we created to preserve cultural artifacts. So I guess right now I'm an accidental internet historian. So we'll have some fun tonight talking about innovation.
Thank you. Okay, you're up.
So good evening again, everybody. I'd like to offer just some framing for our time this evening a little bit, especially about ancient wisdom in relation to an unpredictable future. And I appreciate the peculiar challenge of pairing those things together here in the great high-tech corridor in the United States, where the emphasis usually falls on a bright and shiny future. So I want to invite you just for a moment to imagine with me what it looks like to live on the edge of an unpredictable future. Just a few of the features of that horizon over which we cannot presently see. So imagine with me a society that is living with a severe gap between the extremely wealthy and those in grinding poverty. Imagine with me a society that is governed by an elite class of utterly corrupt politicians. Imagine with me a society that is deeply xenophobic, that is with fortified borders, where people live in desperate fear of strangers, the ones who speak an alien language and practice a really strange religion. In fact, so much so that that religion itself seems threatening and seems dangerous. Now, you might be thinking that I am describing the United States of America in 2017. I'm actually describing the Roman Empire in the 5th century, right on the brink of when the city of Rome was sacked in the year 410 by my ancient ancestors on my mother's side of the family, but that's another story. And in the midst of this world-changing moment, when the so-called eternal city of Rome faced not just an unpredictable future, but actually an unimaginable calamity, a man by the name of Augustine wrote one of the classics of Western literature called The City of God. And he was not referring to Rome. I'm tempted, of course, to offer a detailed synopsis of that amazing book this evening, but I'll give you just this one little quick note about it. Augustine, living in that unimaginable time, did not imagine that we ought to be controlling or managing the future. Instead, he urged his readers to create communities of courage, of compassion, we heard that word a little bit ago, and of deep collaboration. Only there, he argued, can we tap, in these kinds of communities, only there can we tap the resilience that we need to navigate a future that we cannot now foresee. And I actually also like this contemporary image of Augustine much better too, because he was, that was created for the New York Times, by the way. A recent biography of his was written. It's much more closer probably to what he looked like. He was from North Africa, but I digress. So, in our work at the Ignite Institute over the last few years, we've noticed this fascinating trend that I'm sure many of you have as well. Some of you guessed empathy over here really quickly, the E word that Doreen was urging us to guess. Undergraduate institutions and lots of business schools are now offering courses and trainings in empathy and in compassion as the foundations for a successful, meaningful life. Now, of course, we often grin at the Ignite Institute when these are treated as sort of inventions of the 21st century, when really empathy and compassion are the very foundations of ancient wisdom, religious traditions, and spiritual practices. But even more, not disturbing, but we're noting it carefully, is even the need to teach this. What schools are finding is that students, who, by the way, are reporting an increasing number of them are reporting deep isolation and alienation, and schools contact us not infrequently for advice on how to teach empathy and compassion. These things cannot be assumed from our students these days. I'm also really struck, perhaps you saw this is sort of a viral video that's been going around for the last few months. Arthur Brooks, who's the president of the American Enterprise Institute, was speaking at the Kennedy School of Government at Harvard. And he was talking about the deep polarization in our society, by which he meant not only our political discourse, but how that polarization is shaping our families and our schools and our workplaces, and how we view ourselves. And in that talk, he said, the problem in this deep polarization is not disagreement. It's not even anger. The problem is contempt. The problem is contempt. You know immediately what it feels like when you're being treated with contempt, which is one of the best definitions that I've found is the absolute conviction of the utter worthlessness of another human being. So what Arthur Brooks was suggesting and urging us to think about is we will not solve the problem of polarization in our country until we deal with the problem of contempt. And so he contacted, of all people, the Dalai Lama and asked His Holiness, the Dalai Lama, what do you do when you're feeling contempt? Deceptively simple answer, as you might expect. You practice warm-heartedness. I thought, oh, I can't do that. I don't know how to do that. That's not something that I can do just naturally on my own. So one of the things that I took away from this presentation and this insightful analysis by Mr. Brooks is why nearly every wisdom tradition on the planet for many centuries is rooted in a community of practitioners. We can't do this work by ourselves. We need to create, as Augustine said, communities of courage and compassion and collaboration so we can learn how to practice warm-heartedness. A social psychologist has recently noted something very similar in relation to global trends in public health. Here in the United States, we're nearly obsessed with the idea that good health correlates to a good diet. We're not obsessed about that tonight. We're having pizza, so I'm really happy about that. But it's interesting that this is not actually true in other countries, this obsession with diet for good public health. Bad diets in other countries apparently do not correlate to bad health. And so the difference apparently has to do with the character of the society as a whole. And that correlates to good public health. Witness, for example, Norway, Sweden, Denmark, even Spain and Greece are on that list, not just the Scandinavian countries. And this social psychologist, I thought, was very insightful in noting that the biggest health advances of the 20th century were biological, antibiotics, sanitation, vaccines, but the biggest health insights of this century, in contrast, are social. The social conditions of the society in which we live. How can we be creating communities of courage, compassion, deep collaboration, where we can practice warm-heartedness for a better society? So, part of what I would encourage us to do is to remember the old aphorism to think globally and act locally, but now with a twist, to think locally, to act socially. How do we do this? How can we foster leadership that creates those kinds of communities? And why would this matter for a world of global entanglements and planetary crises? We have some planetary crises on our hands. And could any of this have anything to do with the structure of leadership in your own organization, in your own business, in your own community group? Since I'm talking about, I'm the ancient wisdom guy tonight, I'm very tempted to say, well, here are the answers to these questions from ancient wisdom. But having been studying sources of ancient wisdom for many years now, part of what is so clear is that the world's religious traditions and spiritual practices are not about offering answers to these questions. They're about offering ways to think and modes of living that create certain types of communities. Communities that can face an unpredictable future better. So I'm going to wrap this up here with just one example from among many. Oh, I had a slide for that. Rather than answers or solutions, sources of ancient wisdom offer ways of thinking and modes of living. I just said that. That's great. Okay. I want to close with this example from a student of mine recently who worked on a project that we could talk about all evening. It was absolutely fascinating. But just as a quick example, she explored her own African Caribbean roots and spiritual traditions to foster what she came to call an empathic imagination. The result was a radical relational ethic of solidarity with others, rather than assuming at first that we are competing with each other. Through this empathic imagination, to imagine instead that we are in solidarity with one another, and that this also included a renewed relationship to the land, which is not, she was arguing, an inert resource, but a living foundation for our communities. So she takes all this stuff from her own wisdom traditions in her own African Caribbean communities, and she networked a community land trust, the city of Oakland, and local urban community gardens to create a model for ecologically sustainable and economically feasible housing solutions in the Bay Area. You may have heard there are some issues around economically feasible and sustainable housing in the Bay Area. So, and that's just one picture of what she was working on, and there's another which I really love with those kids in those urban gardens. So her project, among many others, and here's where I'll finish, strengthens our shared conviction at the Ignite Institute. And it's this: communities rooted in patterns gleaned from ancient wisdom fuel the engine of innovation and shape compelling styles of leadership. And we're really excited to be exploring exactly how this looks in many different types of organizations and businesses and communities. So I'll stop there, and I think there's even yes, there is a slide for that. And just real quick, just a couple of questions before I hand this off to my colleague Marcia. I think I saw a hand right there.
Yeah, like are you referring to the last slide? It talks about not seeking direct solutions or answers, but
Yes.
providing like sources of
Yes.
ways of thinking. But if we there's a like urgent problem needs to be solved, social problem, economic
Yes.
problem, why can't we work towards answers and solutions?
Oh, I think we absolutely can. This is to be a little clearer about this. I'm referring to sources of ancient wisdom that are not going to give us direct and immediate responses or answers or solutions to the housing issue in the Bay Area, for example. But if we are creating communities that are drawn from these sources of ancient wisdom, then our contention would be we are more grounded in a way to be able to innovate the kind of answers and solutions we need. So this is not against answers or solutions. It's just that these sources of ancient wisdom won't provide them immediately. They create the communities from which those answers and solutions can come. Anybody else? Yes, sir.
First of all, I want to thank you for bringing these core values to humanity, which when you're talking about. I'm into mental health, and I'm also part of the Contra Costa Interfaith Council.
Oh, great. That's my home county.
So, and that is the reason, being delusional, I am a candidate for California governor because of those 4 things you mentioned. Until unless we do this, there are going to be multiple Romes.
Multiple Romes, exactly. Yes.
And we need to stop that. And this is the only way to stop it.
Thank you for that comment. I mean, it is striking my colleague Felipe Maya, who's in the back there, faculty colleague, we were sort of brainstorming about this presentation tonight, and he's brilliant, and so he said, what about ancient Rome? Oh my gosh, yes, and boom, 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 boom. The connections are quite astonishing. Great, so thank you, and we'll be here throughout the evening for any more conversation that you might like to have, and I'll hand this over to Marcia.
I guess we'll innovate our way through this. So good evening again. It's really a joy to be here. As I was kind of sitting here thinking about leadership. Again, my name is Marcia Evans. As I was thinking about leadership, I was thinking about, well, what is one of the components of leadership that I didn't mention in my presentation that is kind of present with me that I want to offer as an introduction? And I kind of hinted towards it in the fact that I believe that when you get into this place where your passions and your purposes kind of intersect, and I kind of hinted towards that by saying, talking about these issues of spirituality and social change and how do we innovate new solutions, that excites me in a very particular way. And even thinking about this certificate program, it excites me. And again, it sets me at this intersection of my purpose and my passion. And as we talk about in my profession, we say that that's a place of calling or vocation, right? And whenever you get to this place of calling or vocation, or simply you're doing what you feel like you were put on this earth to do, it's not just something that you get up and do, it becomes this place of joy. And so I'm offering this on the front side that somehow, some way, leadership is connected to joy. And that could be a good barometer to let you know if you're moving in the type of leadership that is needed in order to face an unpredictable future. So I'm here, I'm happy to be with you. I think authenticity is important as well, so I'm a little tired. But I prepared something. But we're going to talk a little bit about leadership. So leadership is, roughly defined as the act of leading a group of people or an organization, or the art of motivating people towards a common goal. And the type of leadership that we're seeking to foster goes to the example that my colleague Jay mentioned about the woman who was trying to find these solutions for economically feasible housing.
Sustainable housing.
Yes, rooted on a type of earth-based ethos and her religious traditions. Yet despite that, as my mother would say sometimes, she would say some variation of this, that a fish only knows the water in which it swims. And so even though we know about these new models, we are stuck with these prevailing models that capture our imagination of what leadership looks like. And so...
We need to go a few forward.
Okay. Where are we? Are we live?
Here.
We're going to this one.
Keep on going.
Yeah. All right, right here.
Here we go.
Okay. So what do you think of when you see this?
The NRA.
What's that?
The NRA.
Yeah. What else do you see? What type of leadership do you see embodied here? What's that?
All powerful.
Like an all-powerful, yes.
Does everybody know who those people are?
A
Do you
little
know
scary.
this? Scary, but you have, okay, we can't even, so, what's that?
Courageous or
Courageous, powerful, even if we look at it from artistic. He's leading the people. This is a representation of Moses, right? So you have this idea of a charismatic leader with a staff guiding people through the waters, through the troubled waters, into the wilderness, and that becomes an example of the type of leadership that often gets absorbed of how we should be. Obviously, there's other leaders that represents different types. This is Dolores Huerta, Nelson Mandela. Do you know who this guy is? So there's different types of models of leadership. What am I doing?
I don't know.
Okay.
Here, I'll do it for you. There you go.
Yeah, authoritative, charismatic, innovative. There's a coercive command and control. Maybe some coaches are like that. There's situational. Some coaches that talk a lot about preparation. There's democratic. So there's all types of different forms of leadership. And, you know, in times like these, you know, you see forms of leadership on full display when we turn on our television and we watch the news. In fact, one could say that in these times there's a crisis of leadership. And there's a sense of anxiety about the types of leadership that we are seeing. So whether we are talking about these old school models, which kind of look at individualistic approaches, or even some of the newer models, which are more inclusive, I find, you can go back, I find that regardless, everything needs to be re-looked at, reevaluated, reassessed in order to judge its relevance for today. Ignite recognizes that beyond the self, or in contrast to the charismatic leader model, effective leadership styles must be rooted in particular communities and draw from the insights and histories from that community. So let's kind of have a case study and see how this kind of works out. So we can go to the next one. All right, y'all know who this is. It's not Charlton Heston. It's not. No, we have Martin Luther King. You know, he says everyone can be great because everyone can serve, and he's like this archetype of a type of servant leader, right? And this is the image that we usually see of him. You know, one that is elevated. You know, he's on the podium. In fact, this is the March on Washington. This is the ones that we see kind of lording over the crowd. But I want you to see another picture. Okay? Sometimes we get so caught up in the fact of a leader being this singular force that we fail to realize that even leaders are contextualized within a moment of time. Right? And so leadership is not just about who you are, it's about you being able to get in tune with the rhythm and the time and the rhymes of what is happening in the world, in the context of the world. It's interesting though. Ironically, though we are stuck with these images of King, this is what his leadership style usually looked like. Sitting around the table, organizing these in not so glamorous places. I mean, talking about living rooms and in the back hallways of churches and gathering with people, being in community. In fact, do you know the story about the Montgomery bus boycott? Right? Do you know they decided to take a chance on this young 20-something-year-old Baptist minister from Atlanta? I mean, the community was already there. It's not like Martin Luther King said, this is what we're going to do. No, the community was formed. They had their rituals. They had their rootedness. And then they said, in order for us to affect this innovative change that we need to do, we need to kind of spark some leadership. So we're going to choose this guy to kind of represent us. So Martin Luther King is not some singular force outside of and lording over in a type of leadership model. He is one who is deeply embedded in drawing strength from the community. So in fact, this is one of my favorite pictures of him. Martin Luther King, do you see where he is? Right? Yeah, so he's being pushed up. But again, it's being pushed up from the community. So you have your roles, but it's the people who are kind of creating the role for him. And in fact, he's not only ascending to places where he's exercising leadership, he's being lifted up by the community and put there. So from Martin Luther King, we see that authentic leadership style that emerged from the community, was rooted and sustained within the community, and that he then projected strategies for change through the resources of that community. And from that place, King was able to take a leadership stance in helming innovative approaches within a movement through the collective wisdom and strength of the community in which he was embedded. Now, we all know that King wasn't perfect, nor was the leadership of the civil rights era. There was a lot of marginalization of women, there was a lot of misogyny, there was a whole lot of stuff that was going on that was emblematic of his times. And as an activist and also an academic, I believe in critically looking at all of that. So we understand that it's contextualized in its time. However, I believe King at least points us to the type of leadership that we will be engaging with in this program. One that embraces that communities rooted in ancient wisdom fuel the engine of innovation and shape compelling leadership styles. Okay. So let's look, you can go to the next one. So let's look at some of the styles. Okay, so this is the first one. Anybody know what this is? No? Okay. So I'm going to briefly, and this will be really quick, and then we can go for questions. But we're going to explore 3 quick pillars to the type of leadership that we're going to be talking about. The first one has to do with a community context. And in it, I believe that effective leadership includes careful and sustained listening to the communities in which they are embedded. So this symbol is called Openi Inawa. That should be next. Switch, but in that one. And it's from Ghana, right? From the Akan culture. They have these things called Adinkra symbols. And this one is a symbol that represents leadership. And it means the king's eyes, right? And the greater proverb around it is, the king or leader has many eyes from whom nothing is hidden. And in the context of which the proverb was written, is this idea that the king had all of these advisors who had eyes on what was going on, right? That informed them what to do. But for our purposes tonight, I like it because it intimates that a good leader must have eyes on or embrace the perspectives of all the people that you are in community with. Those in your communities or corporations have certain perspectives which provide windows to their stories and their histories, their cultural backgrounds, and the like. And as a leader, it is important to be embedded in the community in a way that you can see and begin to understand the history and stories of both the individual and the collective history and story of the community that informs the culture and practices or its communal context. And once you are able to appreciate the communal context, a good leader is then able to kind of dialogically engage with its own personal context. And that brings us quickly to our second pillar. Being able to effectively see the stories and the histories of your embedded community relies in part of your ability to kind of turn your gaze around and look at your own history and story. You see, every leader is shaped by a familial and cultural history in the same way that every leader leads within a particular social and cultural context. Enhancing an individual leadership style relies to a large degree on a deep awareness of self, especially your socially constructed self, in order to bring forward one's gifts, skills, limitations, and even barriers. And this is done by looking at the wealth and the story of your own lives, your stories, your histories, mining your ancestor, what informs who you are, looking at the lessons, looking at the stories of resilience, looking at the shortcomings, the cautionary tales, knowing that all of that informs who you are, and you bring all of that to the communities in which you are embedded in and the communities in which you work. But you know what? You're not just what has happened to you. You are also formed by the choices of who you want to be. You know, what are the things that make up your core values? And more, what are those things, those internal qualities you hope to embody and express in the world? All of these things of looking at who I am and who I want to be kind of goes into a personal context which informs your authentic self. And leading from a place of your authentic self becomes an anchor from which you can engage others. So effective leadership, yes, tending carefully to one's own cultural history and background, and centering oneself in the awareness of who I am and who I hope to be. And a self-aware leader is one who's able to kind of look back upon themselves and put their personal context, who I am, who I want to be, their authentic self, in conversation with the community in which they're leading. And the last one, the last pillar, just basically has to do with the composition of the communities that we find ourselves in today. When we look at our world, when we look at our classrooms, when we look at our organizations, when we just look at our communities of practice, wherever they may be, we find they are a lot more diverse than they were in times past. And of course, that has freaked some people out. In fact, it has been exploited politically to success in some respect. So this fear of diversity is there, but a great man once said, diversity is not a problem to be managed, but an opportunity to be celebrated. An opportunity to be celebrated. I mean, imagine being able to tap into the wealth of experience and wisdom that is present when, as a community of people from different backgrounds, different religions, different races, ethnicities, sexual orientations, yea, even political affiliations. Imagine if we're able to tap into all of that. Imagine instead of tamping down its potentiality for fear of polarization or upsetting the status quo and trying to make everyone just the same, we celebrated our diversity and our particularities and created an affirming environment where people felt that their unique voices could be heard. So effective leadership includes drawing from the diversity and multiplicity of the wider society and mobilizing and harnessing the strength of diverse communities to foster innovative change. I mean, imagine in this time, in this troubled, crazy time, imagine what thoughts are yet to be thought and what ideas are yet to be dreamed of. That, I believe, is the work of a leader. So in closing, I would like to return to the words of Dr. King. He said, everybody can be great because everybody can serve, but at the end, he says, you only need a heart full of grace and a soul generated by love. And I know these concepts of grace and love can be perceived as a religious or even spiritual idea, but as its core, it just has to do with this idea that we are in this together, that we are all connected, that we all share life. So the only question is, how are we going to choose to be in relationship with each other? How are we going to get along? And the type of leadership that we are talking about emphasizes that leadership is relational. It's a matter of head, but also heart. It's a matter of integrity, yes, ethics, compassion, and empathy. And for those of you who are, into social innovation and social change, it's a matter of creating the resiliency within to fight for and advocate for and create a world that works for everyone, that is worthy of my 10-year-old daughter. And so tonight we talked about being in step and in line with the rhythms of its times. We talked about the interplay between the personal and communal context and the diversity of the communities in which we are relating to. In this certificate program, you will learn that effective leadership stems from the careful and sustained listening to the communities in which we are embedded, attending carefully to one's own cultural history and background, and also your authentic self, those questions, who I am and who I hope to be, and also drawing from the diversity and multiplicity of the wider society. Now, I'm way over time. Am I way over time? I'm good? So this is I put together this slide. Like, this is a good slide. you dig my attempt to try to do some graphic art? This was me. I like that slide because it shows that when our leadership reflects the joined, diverse strengths, not only will we foster new innovative strategies for change, but quite literally, I mean, it's interesting. I don't know, do we know what this is? This is a really cool graphic. You'll see it on everywhere, right? And I don't know what it means. I don't know, it can mean like a type of unpredictable future. It can mean like a realm of infinite potentiality. I don't know exactly what it is. Is that it?
Yes,
That's good.
sure. Yes.
Infinite potentiality. But when we join our hands in our diversity and pool our strength, not only are innovative solutions possible, or innovative solutions can come, I truly believe that all things are possible. All things are possible. And I know they say that politics is the art of the possible, but I really think that leadership is really the art of what's possible. The art of becoming great. The art of doing things that you would think is not possible by coming together and drawing from the resources of the community. So anyway, that's some of the things that we will be talking about in our leadership program, and I'm happy and pleased to take any of your questions.
Okay, guys.
Look at the side.
What do we say to that? Questions, anybody? Did it spark any thoughts? Different style of leadership than we previously thought about? We're all too floored. Did the pizza arrive? Okay, great. Well, maybe we will leave it at that and.
We good? Yes.
Oh,
It's not really a question, but I feel like it's like too short of a time to ask this question,
Oh,
but
let's
just
go
for
for it.
anyone else who's thinking about it too. You were talking about being a leader based on your community, and I'm kind of thinking of like our workplace as a community and
Yes.
how can we be a leader in our workplace, and thinking about like our, as you mentioned, there's a diverse background of people and a diverse like work culture and things like that. And so I'm just thinking of like we work with people from all over the world, and they're from international offices and that kind of thing. And then I also think about like our friendships that we have, like that's our community too. And then we have our physical community, like the people who live around us.
Yeah.
And so it's not so much a question, but just kind of like what I thought of is as an individual, like how do you like harness your community in those individual roles, or like kind of see it more as like a broader community and like how those parts intersect, you know? And so like as each of us are finding how to be an authentic leader in our community, it's like sometimes that's going to be in different ways
Yes.
depending on maybe the community that you're in, or I don't know.
That's good. You started with a question, you answered the question. You did some commentary,
Well done.
but yeah,
Well
no,
played.
I just want to kind of underline, underscore, italicize, bold, kind of what you just said is that yes, you are actually in multiple communities, right? And so the work of being an authentic leader in those places will look different. And in fact, even when I had that list of all those things, the truth of the matter is, effective leaders, adjust, right? They adjust. But being able to have the consciousness, I guess the approach, that says, I am aware of the community in which I'm embedded. What are the histories, the stories, the values that are there? What are the sources of resilience that is happening here? How do I draw upon that? How do I bring my authentic self, who I am and who I hope to be, unto this space, right? And then how do I actively find ways to not just say, oh, so-and-so, that's how so-and-so always acts. Or, oh man, I can't believe so-and-so is late, they're always late. Or whatever it is, not knowing that, well, maybe, yes, this person might be late for some reason, but it might be part of her culture where time is not organized in such a way. And so we're busy getting upset about so-and-so not being late, but in actuality, they might be bringing into this community this idea that being in relationship is more than just looking at a clock. It's spending time. So having that consciousness, you'll be able to draw the gifts from the communities in which you are in. And so it's an approach. It's an approach. It's a way and an awareness that you bring to your work.
The community will tell you what it needs.
This is so true, right? And that's why the leader has many eyes, right? You are aware. You're keeping your eyes open on what the community needs, what they're doing, what they're asking. You're getting a pulse. You're listening, but you're also feeling, right? There's a lot of ways of being a leader that is beyond the conventions that we are used to. So, yeah.
Well,
Y'all hungry?
Thank you, Mike. Okay, great. Well, we have one more fabulous speaker, Don, but before that, not only are we... it's
Don't put me
important
between them and
to feed our minds, to feed our minds and our souls, it's also important to feed our bellies, okay? So the pizza is outside, it's warm. Please just take a couple of moments to go on out, grab a slice, and then come on back in and have a seat. And Don will be up next.
Oh yeah, and if you haven't signed in, please do sign in.
Yeah. Okay, all right.
speaking of Ramadan, once,
Oh,
and the other speakers went long. It was my turn. The sun was just going
oh
down.
no.
You could smell the food.
Oh no.
Gosh, it's where you learn that brevity is the essence.
So, thank you. Yeah, no, I remember that. Jay was short. So you were long. So
I was short, that's amazing.
Yeah, take a quick pizza break here and we will resume shortly.
and then Don's going to be right on time. So everything's going to work out perfectly.
I'm trying to think how to bridge. My gosh, you guys are quite inspiring. Both of you.
Well, I had a sense of
I'm just a nerd.
I was really looking forward to hearing you. I was looking at the slides that had come on. I'm like, I can't wait to hear how this goes to
I didn't
work.
have much time to I was corresponding with Kathy from the back of the
Right.
Jeep in Tanzania.
Literally?
Yeah. My wife and I just got back from our Maasai wedding.
Wow!
The Noro crater.
Wow!
She's not Maasai. Oh, but still. My goodness, yes. A 5,000-year-old culture. It was really quite amazing.
Well, there's your bridge.
A guy with a blanket and a spear who was not dressed up for us. It was Friday.
I mean, I hope I was able to underline some of the
So I have to tell you, I have no idea how to follow these two guys. I have the feeling that I'm the token nerd on the panel tonight. But maybe there are a couple of metaphors that can be mined from what we're going to talk about for the next 15 minutes. I hope so. I'm going to leave most of that to you. But if I think of something, I'll bring it up. And by way of context, I'll just mention that I was called upon recently to chair a panel in Santa Clara on drones. Drones. And I told the lady who asked me to do this, I said, I've been in the tech industry in the Silicon Valley for 25 years. I know my way around a protocol stack, but I don't know anything about drones. She said, it doesn't matter. I have a feeling that you could moderate a panel. And it was wonderful. I learned a ton. It was excellent. But you'll never guess, a bunch of nerds like me in a room like this one in Santa Clara, the most interesting conversation was the moral compass of software.
Oh. Oh.
Think about that for a moment. It's an underappreciated and underdiscussed thing, and of course it has obvious applications for military drones.
Right.
But it's got applications for all kinds of, and we're living in a drone, self-driving, blah, blah, blah world. And the idea of software needing a moral compass is fascinating to me. So maybe there'll be a book or something on that.
Yeah.
Tonight, I'm going to talk to you a little bit about innovation. And I'll start with a quote that somebody may recognize here. It's the one in quotation marks. Does anybody know this quote? Well, Mark, you do, but you're cheating because you know all of these quotes. Mark, who is it?
Oh, gee.
Sorry, I did not mean to put you on the spot. No. This is a quote by a guy who's not very famous, but should be. His name is Alan Kay. And he is one of the innovators of the PC era. He helped invent the PC. He helped invent the laptop. He helped invent the concept of an operating system. He's a very, very smart guy, still living. I've had the opportunity to meet him a couple of times. He's also pretty pithy with the sound bites, and this is my favorite. His other famous sound bite is, perspective is worth 80 IQ points. And he's debating in a lighthearted way whether that quote or this one will go on his headstone. But I wanted to use this as a way to talk about innovation, because I think there is a little bit to unpack here that could be quite interesting. And of course, Alan's point is saying, don't worry about trying to predict what's going to happen, make it happen. And there's a little nugget for all of us in life. And in fact, I think the Silicon Valley, we have a culture of just making it happen. Which is, I think, something very special about all of us being right here, right now, in this place. I didn't do a lot.
Good, yes. I'm not the only one.
So if we were to come up with a working definition of innovation, I'm going to use a couple of Alan Kay's words. Innovation, most people think of innovation as coming up with an idea. And that's part of it. I would call that ideation. Ideation is not innovation. Innovation is much more complex. Innovation has a number of moving parts. And I'll just put 3 of them on the table for you using Kay's words here. I'll talk about prediction, and I'll talk about invention, and I'll talk about execution. There are a couple of myths that float around about innovation here in our culture right now. Somebody told me, I haven't been able to validate this, but somebody told me there's a new company being started every day in San Francisco right now.
Good Lord.
I don't know if it's true, but even if it's only partially, traffic would say that it's possibly true. But we're living in a time and a place of unprecedented innovation right here. And it's not, if 5 years ago, if you were to say, oh yeah, I work in the Mission District in Silicon Valley, you'd be laughed at. That's not the Silicon Valley. Silicon Valley is the almond orchards in San Jose and Santa Clara. But guess what? It's here now. It's stretched all the way up here. And this is a nicer place to live than Milpitas, but with respect to people who live in Milpitas. This is where you'd rather live. So stuff's happening here. We're at an unprecedented point in history, not only economic, but cultural here in the Silicon Valley. So let's talk a little bit about innovation. If I look, just click one more. I'm going to propose a working definition of innovation. Innovation isn't just thinking up the new idea. It's a combination of at least 3 things. It's prediction, going back to Alan Kay. It's invention, going back to Alan Kay. And execution. And if we look at those words a little bit more carefully, I think I have a little silly bill here. Yeah. These become rather important. So, prediction. What am I going to do? What's the future? What am I going to build? What's the idea? That's a big thing. And it's critical because it's the head of the food chain. And we'll come back to this though. It turns out it's not that hard. That's the easy part. I'll jump ahead to execution for a moment. Big companies, medium companies, are execution machines. We know exactly what to do once the spec is finalized. We can turn out products till the cows come home. We know how to do this. Quality, reliability, cost, functionality, time to market. We know exactly what to do on execution. The hard part is in the middle, what Kay calls invention. I'm taking a small liberty with his intent here to talk about this middle piece. And I think the next one I think is just about, there is a meme in the Silicon Valley that large enterprises, big companies, can't innovate. And it's baloney. Large companies can innovate. But it depends a lot on the culture of the company. And maybe there's another moral compass thing here of some sort. But the fact is that big companies have ideas coming out of their ears. When I led a big group of 10,000 or so engineers at Cisco, I got an idea in my email at least every day. Ideas are cheap. Well, I mean, they're important. They're essential. You have to have them. Somebody has to have the idea. I was rarely the guy with the idea. I mean, I took a lot of little businesses and made them big, but I was rarely the guy with the idea. But a lot of people have ideas. These are entrepreneurs. And these are people who are very valuable. But you get ideas from customers, you get ideas from employees, you get ideas from partners all the time. That's not the hard part. And I already said execution is what most organizations, most firms are designed for. The hard part is in the middle. The hard part is the invention. It's taking the idea and turning it into something that could be built as a product. Again, rich ground for mining a metaphor. Here, the middle ground, what I call it the valley of death. That's a little bit morbid, but it's where most good ideas die. They die before they get to execution, for a very simple reason. I think I put that slide on this. Yeah, where are the resources? Because in an organization, ideas are free. They come from everywhere all the time. So you don't have to worry about the ideas, probably. Probably you don't have to worry about the ideas. And the execution, you're designed for that. That's what you do. I mean, you've got hundreds or thousands of people who know exactly what to do with taping out an ASIC, or laying out a circuit board, or taking it from 6 layers to 4 layers, or getting it into production, or taking cost out of it. That's what you're designed for. You know how to do that. You've got hundreds or thousands of experts on execution. Invention. Invention is the hard part. Invention is nobody's job in a typical enterprise. It really isn't. It's nobody's job. It's a nice hobby, but it takes time. Ideas don't take time. Ideas are an email. Execution is a disciplined process. Invention takes time, though. And it's really hard, and we don't put anybody on it. Dumb? Is that dumb? Should we take people off of building products that keep the lights on and say, hey, go invent some of these things? You'd like to think so. And in a resource-rich environment in which there are no competitive or economic pressures, no macroeconomic problems, no uncertainty, a steady product stream, no competitors, I suppose you'd do that. Guess how often it happens? 0.0% of the time. Yeah, it's really, really hard to do. So this middle ground between predicting the future and executing the future turns out to be the really tough part, what I call invention. If you think about it, there there are a number of ways that organizations can get around this, and I won't try. There's another metaphor available here. I'm going to talk about these 5 things in increasing order of complexity, and you're all going to be responsible for connecting the dots with everything you've heard tonight. So I hope you have a couple of questions here as I wrap up with these couple of points. The simplest thing that you can do as a leader, number 1, is reallocate your resources. Ask some of these people to work on this instead of that. It sounds simple. It's not simple. It's very, very tough. There are a couple of issues here. One of them is that the reason that you're allowed to live is because you've got people producing products, and this could be hardware, software, service, whatever. You've got people producing products that are keeping the lights on. This is why you're allowed to live. And you can take people off and put them on invention, but your risk is high. It's much harder, and who do you pick? Everybody would volunteer, but if everybody volunteers, who's going to build stuff? It's quite a difficult problem. My favorite of these is the second one. Have you ever heard the term skunk works? Skunk works? I love the term because it's colorful. Yeah, my classes, we have a lot of fun with skunk works and cannibalization. But skunk works comes from the aerospace industry. And the story goes that one of the aerospace companies, I think it was Lockheed, in Southern California, set up a Quonset hut on their property somewhere and put some engineers in this place with, locked doors to go develop, I don't know, a new kind of missile probably. And nobody knew what they were working on. It was secret. The people didn't talk about it. They went into a different door in a different building, and they developed whatever it was. I don't know exactly what it was, but in order to take any mystique out of it, they painted a sign on the wall called Skunk Works. So it would be unattractive for people to go messing around. Anybody who knows the story of Apple Computer knows that Steve Jobs did something similar when he developed the Macintosh, and in their case they hoisted a pirate flag over the building, not a skunk, but it's the same idea. But skunk works can be very effective. In an organization, what it usually means is asking a few people to go off and do something special. Usually it's a few people. Handful of people, and you kind of pillage one of your production teams, you grab a few people that you trust, and you say, hey, go see if that could work. And they do it sometimes evenings and weekends. That's the way life is. They don't talk about it to other people, but if you're lucky, 1 time in 10, they hit a home run. In my particular case at Cisco, we were developing a next generation router. And the current generation router was just fine, thank you, nothing wrong with it. And a handful of engineers on evenings and weekends figured out how to get digital signal processors onto a board that would fit in this router. And we ended up inventing the first voice over IP router. And that became the fastest product to $1 billion in Cisco's history. Skunk Works, 4 or 5 people coming in on the weekends, tinkering around with things. So I'm a big fan. I'm a big fan of Skunk Works. The third area, which has been written about a lot, is an internal startup. So you cordon off a group of people, you make a department, if you want to think of it that way, whose job it is to invent Ideas come in, they develop the ideas, they get them to prototype stage. If it looks like they're going to be a viable product, then they move them into one of the production groups. This is also a wonderful strategy when resources are abundant, competition is low, market share is high, the economy is growing, customers are happy. However, if there's a downturn, guess who's the first department to go? Internal startup. Because it feels like a luxury at that point. So, plus and minus. And then the last two here are what I will call exogenous innovation. And this is, again, a place for you. I'm not going to try to connect the dots, but you can put on your metaphorical thinking hats. Exogenous innovation, which is, if we can't do it, let's get somebody else to do it. Maybe somebody else can do it. And the tried and true method that I'll say, having spent 21 years at Cisco really pioneered is acquisition. Before Cisco, it was common for big technology companies like AT&T to have their own internal labs with thousands of PhDs working on stuff. I mean, AT&T invented the transistor in New Jersey this way, with thousands of PhDs working in their labs. Great method, but absolutely nobody does it anymore because it's extremely expensive to have 10,000 PhDs who aren't earning any revenue. The advantage of maybe being a monopoly during that time for AT&T. So where did it go? How did that shift? It shifted to the venture capital community, right here in the Silicon Valley. The venture capital community, which was invented in all of our lifetimes, looking around the room, most of our lifetimes, is a new thing where people would say, well, I'll give you some money if you think you can do this, and if you do it, we'll all be happy, and if you don't, then hopefully the next one will. That's Don's simplistic view of venture capital. And it created Silicon Valley. It really did. I mean, starting with Fairchild, but name any company. Most successful Silicon Valley companies are the product of venture capital. And so acquisition is a way of outsourcing your exogenous innovation to the venture capital community. They're taking the risk. You're not taking the risk. They're taking the risk. And what if you buy a company that's no good? Who cares? Because usually you're buying it with equity, and equity is not like writing a check. Equity is you're tearing off a little tiny piece of the value of your company, and you're buying that one. Cisco just did number 223, I think, this week. I mean, they've got it down. And Cisco likes to say that, they're all successful. They're not all successful, but most of them are. For Cisco, in the industry, most are disasters. Most of these acquisitions are disasters. They haven't quite got the formula, but Cisco has. And then the last thing that I'll mention is something called a spin-in. Spin-in. We've all heard of spin-outs. Has anybody heard this term spin-in? So we may have invented it, for all I know. We may have invented the term, at least. It's where you give some trusted people a bag of money to go develop something that you don't think you can develop in-house. And you have an agreement that if they meet certain milestones, you'll buy their company. Cisco has done it publicly 3 times, all of which were very successful. Very expensive because you're kind of paying twice. You're funding the company and then you're buying it from the people you funded. Very expensive. But the reasons for doing this are actually pretty good. It's generally done with with a disruptive innovation. So acquisitions and spin-ins, exogenous innovation is done when you don't think you can do it in-house. And when you don't think you can do it in-house, it's not because you don't think you have enough smart people. That's never the problem. The problem is that it's messing with something you're already doing. Disruptive innovation, we call this. It's disrupting something you're already doing. And the organizational antibodies in any company don't favor a disruptive innovation. One of Cisco's best acquisitions ever was a company here in the city called Meraki. Meraki is in the business of making $1,000 routers. Cisco's in the business of making $100,000 routers. Cisco is not going to go put people on developing a $1,000 router. Obviously, messing with the business model. But what Meraki did was they said, well, we'll make the hardware cheap and we'll put the intelligence and software in the cloud. And that division of Cisco has, I don't know, it's 10x from the acquisition time. But it's nothing that Cisco would have done internally. We just didn't have, the antibodies were too great. Sitting around a table like this one and saying, well, I need 100 people to go build something that does the same thing as your product that costs 1/100th of the price is not a very gratifying situation. So disruptive innovation is often an exercise of going to the outside and pulling in intellectual capital that's not already in your business. So this is kind of a simple concept, and this is not a formula by any means. It's just something from my experience. But if you think about innovation rather than simple ideation, but as the combination of predicting, inventing, and executing, I think that's a useful formula in a lot of different areas. So I know that was a lot of nerd talk. Let me ask if you have any questions or have made a connection that I haven't thought of. Nobody's asleep on the one hand.
I think you probably made us think about things we don't usually think about.
Oh, good. Oh,
That
good.
was good. Yeah. That was good.
Any other thoughts about innovation? Any way to apply it that I haven't thought of? Yes, sir.
I think this week it was announced that Jeff Bezos made $100 billion, became the first $100 billion person.
Yeah, I read that.
And
On paper.
well, I don't get. I wouldn't like $1 billion or not. But,
Pretty good milestone, though. Good to be Jeff.
but we know the momentum of Amazon was fueled by the ability to do business without paying taxes. I mean, initially, and so I just want to ask you, as a leader in this industry, what is the responsibility of these corporations to, if collaboration is our goal, we're going to collaborate, and we've got to share the wealth, and the infrastructure in our cities is crumbling, and a lot of that comes from companies who didn't pay taxes into those local governments. And so we have a real crisis. Just curious what you think.
I think so. I have three ideas about this. One is that when you buy stuff online now, you do have to pay state taxes. So that was a kind of a temporary thing while that business model was getting going. The second thing is that's really not how Amazon got successful. Amazon got successful on something called the float. The float is the cost that a retailer would incur by keeping inventory in anticipation of sales. And so what Amazon, the brilliant thing about Amazon was they don't buy anything from anybody until you buy it from them. And of course they have these huge mechanized warehouses now, but the stuff sits there only for hours or days. So that's how, I mean, that was really the brilliance of their business model. And the third thing about sharing the wealth, that's complicated. I mean, you've got to pay taxes, and we've got all these, companies now that are expatriating to go to economies with lower, like Ireland, with lower taxes. That's only temporary, though. I mean, Ireland might be able to do that to attract businesses for a generation, say, but not forever. And so that's only a temporary disequilibrium. We have to be careful. It's a slippery slope. I had a very friendly debate with a gentleman recently regarding self-driving big rigs. So you've all seen, I think Uber and Tesla and whoever else now are testing self-driving big rigs. And so some truckers are gonna be out of work. What do we do with that? The conventional wisdom says, well, we're creating many more jobs to design and develop self-driving big rigs than we are eliminating truck driving jobs. The problem is that the guy who's driving a truck is probably not the guy who's going to go figure out the collision avoidance algorithm. Probably, maybe, but probably not. And so we have a social dilemma here. And so the friendly debate I was having was with a guy who's on the city council of Palo Alto. And his position was, well, let's not kill the innovation, because the innovation will be healthy in the long term. But let's put a moratorium on it for 10 years. So these 50-something truck drivers can learn a new skill before their jobs go away. I'm not sure that's the answer. I think that just drives business to the next town over. I would much rather have some investment in retraining or in something else that would take the place of that self-driving truck. I know I'm sounding a little bit libertarian here. I don't mean to. My wife is from Oregon, and my oldest daughter went to college there, and it's one of 2 states where you're not allowed to pump your own gas. Jersey's the other one, right. And so it's the best state for gas pumpers in the world, but they're still relying on beaver fur and timber to support their economy. Have you been to Oregon? I mean, it's a beautiful, beautiful place. There's nothing going on economically there. The sawmills are, I don't know what they're doing with beaver fur anymore, but the sawmills are all closing down. And they have nothing. They have no other plan. Now they think, well, maybe it'll be marijuana. Great. Is it that's your answer? Gas pumping and marijuana? Intellectually, I struggle with that. That was a very long-winded answer to the same question. I apologize. Yes?
First of all, thank you, for your presentation. I like the ideas that you shared around invention and how you mesh them together in a very cohesive fashion, so thank you for that. My question maybe ties together effective leadership and some of the topics that were previously talked about, some of the items that you alluded to, and fostering more invention or a greater capacity for invention in organizations. Any 1 or 2 traits or behaviors of the most effective leaders that you would say in those organizations?
That's really good.
That's possible.
I'll give you 2 off the top of my head. One is what I call planned experimentation. Take some risks. Don't bet the farm. Take some risks. Experiment with a few things. I was the leader of WebEx for a few years after Cisco bought them, and their founder a really, really interesting guy named Subra Iyer. Was brilliant guy. Not a very good leader by his own definition, but a brilliant guy. He said Subra, the investor, would have fired Subra, the CEO, a long time ago. But he worked for me for a number of years, and we would have these deep conversations, and one night he said, "What is Cisco's methodology? How do you decide what you're going to do?" I said, "Well, I don't know. What's WebEx's methodology?" He said, "Well, we try some stuff. If it works, we do more, and if it doesn't, we stop." I said, "That's Cisco's methodology too. Brilliant. That's it. Try some stuff. If it works, do more, and if it doesn't, stop." Pretty good. Pretty simple. The other thing has to do with a bit more to do with leadership. I touched on this. Resource reallocation is really, really hard because sometimes as a leader you have to say, "I'm sorry, I'm shutting down your department and I'm giving it to her. It's nothing personal, but I need to reallocate resources." It's nothing personal, but boy, it's personal. I mean, it is, you don't feel very good. I mean, when that happens. This does happen, and you have to do it. And the irony here is that many times what you're doing is taking resources out of a successful department to put it into a department that we have no idea is going to be successful. So the essence of leadership in product development, hardware, software, or services, is reallocating resources from today's success to tomorrow's success. And it's never a sure thing. Yes?
As a segue to that, you're right, it's never a sure thing, and one has to move things around with the uncertain future and see what's there. Do you think it's should be the responsibility of companies and their leaders to allocate resources for the retraining, which you mentioned a little earlier, for people that would need to be retrained from defunct groups to the newer products? I don't hear many do that except for one company that I'm aware of. I'm curious what your thoughts are on that.
In my experience, most companies do offer some resources there. Generally speaking, in an ongoing enterprise, you've got 4 quadrants that have people working in them. You have invention, you have scale, you have optimization, and you have offloading. This is the circle of life for a product. And the problem is that people tend to accumulate in the scaling and the optimization buckets. And what you have to try to do all the time is cycle them back through the other way. And sometimes the people are not the right people. For example, I'm not an invention guy. I'm a scale guy. I've lived my whole career in scale. Take a $0 business and make it into $1 billion. I've been very lucky. I've got to do it 3 times. But if you ask me to invent something, wrong guy. So there's a lack of fungibility of resources that most businesses don't really completely appreciate. And I'm not sure it could be trained. Could I be trained to invent? I don't know. I mean, I kind of doubt it. What is the joke about it bores the trainer and annoys the pig? I don't know what exactly, but I mean, probably not. But what you can do in a larger enterprise, you've got a liquidity of job roles where you can go other places. I mean, boy, 21 years at Cisco and 5 years at Sybase, I never had a job I was qualified for. Someone would say, "Oh, maybe we can get Don to do that," and I would go in and eventually figure it out. And it gave me a very rich career. I certainly have nothing to complain about. there are, in traditional industries, non-tech industries, sometimes they offer employees whose jobs are eliminated by outsourcing or technology the option of retraining or cash. And the sister of a good friend of mine a few years ago took the cash and not the retraining. So that was nice for 6 months, but that's all. I mean, it's like people around here who get paid $10,000 to move out of their rent-controlled apartment. Yay, I've got $10,000, yippee. But where am I going to live? So I think the long term is better than the short term. And yes, I do think that companies that have a social conscience do take those things into consideration for their employees.
And I guess I feel that it's going to become imperative for them to get into the trajectory of where we are headed.
I mean, should it be the law? I don't know if it should be the law, but it's the right thing to do. I mean, look at, the Salesforce is a company that's a great example right here. I see Doreen standing up in my peripheral vision, so I know I have to stop here. They're a company.
So as I am.
They're a company with a moral compass. I mean, they do 1% of profit, 1% of employee time, and 1% of equity into socially responsible causes. Mark Benioff started the company with that philosophy, and I, for one, hope that's the future for technology.
On that note, thank you so
Thank
much. Alrighty, everyone. We'll really want to be respectful of everyone's time because our pizza kind of ate into a little bit of the evening. But wanted to wrap this up and also to hear back from you. Some of the words that we heard tonight were like invention, moral compass, authenticity, disruptive, challenging, making money, complexity, social conscience, ancient, modern, from today's success to tomorrow's success, never a sure thing. So where does this leave us all? These are really hard questions to answer. And in just 45 minutes of wisdom that has been shared with us. And for that reason, Ignite, together with our partners from the Global Chamber and from the German American Chamber, believe in investing more time and trying to build an understanding of how do we combine the resources that we have that will help us to build a better world. And it's not just doing the same thing again and again. It's looking at where we've come from, what have we learned. It's looking at who we are and what can we bring to the planet. And then it's looking at how do we dump it all on its head and look at it from all different angles to figure out what we need to do for a better today and an even better tomorrow. So I would just really like to thank you all for your attention and for your amazing questions. And we will be sharing, this has been live streamed, and so we'll share with you all the link to the live stream. And if it's all right, we'd also like to just send you a short questionnaire for some feedback on what you thought about tonight, things that you didn't hear that you thought maybe we should have heard, right? Or things that you said, no, that's already being done. Don't worry about that. Focus over here. Right? Or other things that are really, really perplexing to you, and you're looking for where can I pull from to help me move forward in these areas. Right? So on behalf of all of us, I'd just like to thank you all and also ask you to please give a huge thank you to our speakers. And we also have a little something for you all, okay? To wish you the merriest of holidays and all the best in your most unpredictable future. And you can find these right outside where you found the pizza. Just know that there's 3 different types, so choose your favorite. We have Chardonnay for the white drinkers. We have Merlot for the heavy red, and we have a cab for the in the middle. Okay? So thank you once again. And if you have any questions, we have several of us here from the organization in addition to our faculty here. We've got Aaron, who's been live streaming, responsible for marketing. We have Madhu, who's responsible for project management. And we have Kathy, who's one of the leaders in the creation of this program here, along with Jay, our lead faculty. We have Felipe, who's a faculty member. And we have Henry from the Global Chamber. And we have Vicente, who's outside setting up the wall. So thank you all very, very much. It was a pleasure and very happy to